In session 18 here, we're going to be taking a look at additional uses of the coordinate graph. And in particular, what we're going to be doing is extending the graph to be able to handle negative values for both the x and the y coordinate. Up to this point on the previous lessons, our coordinate graph started here at the origin, and then the y-axis went straight up, which is still the case here. And from our origin, our x-axis went to the right, which is still accurate. But that only dealt with positive values for both the x-axis and the y-axis. Well, in fact, we need to be able to extend the graph to be able to handle values that are negative, where x is negative or y is negative. So what we need to do then is to extend the x-axis not only to the right of the origin, but to also extend it off to the left. And then our y-axis needs to not only be extended upwards from the origin, but also downwards. And these arrows indicate that the lines, the axis, do go on forever. Okay then, how do we now handle negative numbers? Well, let's just go ahead and start plotting some points. I'm going to read these out loud instead of writing them down. The first point that I want to plot is -3, 2. And remember, in each set, in each ordered pair, the x value comes first and then the y value. So I said -3, 2. Well, on the x-axis, at this starting point here, if I go right, that indicates that my x value is positive. If I go left, that indicates that it's negative. So I need to go 3 to the left. -1, -2, -3. Next, I need to do a +2. Well, for my y-axis, positive is up, so I need to go up 1, up 2. So there's my point that has the coordinates -3, 2. And remember, if a number does not have a sign written in front of it, it means that that is still a positive. So in each of the cases here, 5, 5, and 10, all three of these are positive, even though there's not a plus or a positive sign written out in front of it. If it's a little bit simpler at the beginning here, you can go ahead and write in on your graphs positive signs to remind you that these are positive numbers. Okay, that's our first point. The second point that we want to plot is 0, -6. So our x-axis is at 0. That's the coordinate. Well, that's here at the origin. And then the y value is -6. Well, for positives, we need to go above the origin for y. For negatives, we need to go beneath it. So we need to go down 6, -6. So there's that point there with the coordinates of 0, -6. The next point is 2, 4. So we want to come to the right, +2, and then up 4. So there's our point for that, 2, 4. The last one is -2, -1. Start at our origin, -2 would be 2 to the left, and then -1 would be 1 beneath. So the coordinates for this point here are -2, -1. So with a little practice, this will become pretty easy for you to visualize that negative numbers on the x-axis just go left of the origin, and negative numbers for the y-axis simply go beneath the origin. And you also might consider thinking of this maybe as directions. Let's say you have a starting point here. This starting point could be anything. Let's say you're out traveling on a road and you got your map out and you're plotting your course. Well, wherever your car is at that point, we'll just treat that as your origin or your starting point. Well, what you could do is you could say, well, that direction there will be north. This direction here is south. This direction here to the right being east, and this direction here being west. So let's say you had something to the effect of, we need to go west -5, and then we need to go south -5. So if we are wanting to travel west 5 miles and then south 5 miles, west would correspond to a -5. Why? Because we're going to the left of our origin here. our origin being here. So that could represent our west direction. We're going to go minus 5 miles west and then minus 5 miles toward the south. Now, minus 5 doesn't mean that we're losing 5, it's just a direction here. A positive 5 would mean we would be going north from that point. A minus 5 would simply mean we'd be going south. So that point would be somewhere right in there. So after we went 5 miles to the west and then 5 miles south, here would be our ending point. So sometimes it's helpful to think of a compass, north, south, east, and west, with north representing the positive on the y-axis, E representing the positive on the x-axis, west representing the negative on the x-axis, and south representing the negative on the y-axis. Lastly, before we go over our review, now that we have extended our graph, our coordinate graph, to handle negative numbers, you can see that it's broken the graph into 4 main quadrants, or 4 main sections. You got this quadrant here, which is above the x-axis and to the right of the y-axis. We have this quadrant over here, which is to the left of the y-axis and above the x-axis. We also have this quadrant over here, which is to the left of the y-axis and beneath the x-axis. Then we have our last quadrant over here, which would be to the right of the y-axis and beneath the x-axis. And what they've done is they've labeled each of those quadrants and given it a number. And what you do is you start at the top right and you label that quadrant 1. Then you move counterclockwise. That would be quadrant 2. Then you go down to quadrant 3, and lastly over to quadrant 4. Why would they start at the top right with the 1 as opposed to starting the way we normally read, which is left to right? I think it has to do with the fact is that up until this point, most of your coordinate graphing has been done where you've had positive values for x and y only. We've only, up in the lesson so far, we've only introduced negative numbers recently. And so the graph that we've most often had started with the origin here, and then our y went up and our x went to the right. So since that's the way you normally graphed with positive values for both the x and the y, they went ahead and gave that the starting point as quadrant 1. And then they just went counterclockwise from there. 2, 3, and then 4. Okay, I'm going to call out 4 points, and I want you in your own mind to see if you can determine which of the 4 quadrants that each of these points will have its graph within. The first one is minus 3, comma, minus 6. Well, minus 3, you start here at your origin. Your minus 3 is going to be your x. So your minus 3 is going to take you this way, to the left. Then you also need to go to minus 6. Well, minus 6 for the y is going to take you down here. So you're going to be somewhere within the 3rd quadrant for that point. Your next point is 1, comma, minus 1. Start at your origin. X's are first. You go over 1. Remember, 1 is the same thing as positive 1. So that's going to take you to the right. And then the minus 1 for y is going to take you down. So you're going to be somewhere here in the 4th quadrant. How about 1, comma, 2? Start at your origin, come over 1. That's to the right of the y-axis now. And then you also had a positive 2. That's going to take you up above the x-axis. So you're going to be somewhere over here in quadrant 1. And then lastly, minus 4, comma, 6. Start at your origin, go minus 4. That's going to take you over here toward the left of the y-axis. And then you need to go up 6, which is going to take you above the x-axis. So you're going to be somewhere here in quadrant 2. Quickly then, as a review, your coordinate graph now has 4 quadrants or sections in it, which can now effectively handle negative numbers as well as positive numbers being assigned to both the x and the y-axis, or the x and the y coordinates. And lastly, all 4 quadrants do meet at a single point, and that single point being called the origin. Okay, that finishes session 18 on using the coordinate graph to handle negative as well as positive coordinates.